Hi, so welcome to our Linux command line tutorial workshop. The sign-in and slides are in the tiny URL. Okay, so first of all, we were wondering what kind of skill level does everyone have with Linux and command line? Like none or a lot, or yeah, there's a poll.
Made a poll. Okay, that's everyone. I guess we're all kind of mixed around. If you guys are curious, so we're gonna go from like the beginning. I'm gonna just close the poll and let everyone continue.
Okay. Yeah, so the command line is an interface computer. So like like a GUI is like if you're interacting with the desktop, like you click on different buttons, it's like graphic. But command line interface CLI is different because you interact with it with text instead of clicking on things. So you can hear the term shell, which refers to the program that takes commands from the keyboard and performs and executes them, which is therefore serving as your interface, like how clicking on stuff with a mouse would with the GUI. So why use command line interfaces? They consume less memory, are faster. Also, you only need a keyboard. You don't need to have a mouse to click on things. Easier to script and lots of control to the user. You get to control exactly what commands you're doing, which is cool. Remote access, so you can go into a desktop from far away, which is very convenient, like for our CS servers here. And it's the cool factor, like, yeah, it's really fun. Downside being you have to interact with the text. You can't, it maybe is a little bit less intuitive than like graphics, but yeah. So what is Linux or Unix? Linux is a family of open source Unix-like operating systems initially developed by Linus Torvalds in 1991. Unix is a family of multitasking, multi-user computer OSs first developed starting in 1969 at the AT&T Bell Labs. So the thing we're going to be using for our project is Raspberry Pi, and that's based on Debian or Debian GNU Linux, which is a Linux distribution of free and open source software. So like we have to use Linux in order to interact with our Raspberries. So in Linux, there are two main things. Everything is either a file or a process. A file is like your collection of documents, folders, everything is in your devices. And the process is commands that you're running or executing. And each one has a number ID. Yeah, but that would be kind of like something you just wanted more for like CS classes. Okay, so in Linux, we have a hierarchy of file systems, defining directories and contents. So we generally like start off with a root directory, like in your computer, maybe the root's like the home, or not really home, but like just like it would maybe hold your desktop documents and so on and so forth, and like all your libraries. And then from there, you can navigate in. Yeah, and everything access from there. Okay, so onto some basic Linux commands. So these are just commands you can like type into your terminal or whatever thing is running your Linux. You just type them in and run them. So in order to know what directory you're in, you can do pwd, print your working directory, change directories. You have to do cd path to directory, so you can like go in multiple steps at a time that way. I believe, yes. Yeah.
So we'll be talking about paths, I think, a little bit later.
Yeah. or you can just like do it one step at a time if you are slightly more slow. You can also like make directories with mkdir, and then path directory like that. You can make an empty file by doing touch and then the name you want to name your file. List what files are in directory with ls, and then possibly an option, possibly a file. If you just say ls, it lists your current directory, so that's kind of great for navigation. You can do ls to see where you can go, and then cd that place. So very nice for navigating. If your file is not specified, it defaults to the current directory you're in. And then some useful options we have -d lists directories and other contents. -a shows all files, including hidden ones, and -l is long listing format. Okay, more commands. In order to move files around, mv the source destination, copy a file, cp source destination, copy directory with contents, cp-r source destination, which that note there, we can use different things. Delete a file, rm path to the file you want to delete directory with contents, rm -r path directory, find files, find the path you want to take, and then the different options, which is like the previous slide. Sorry. Learn what command does, man command. So that way you can like pull up all the stuff you can do with the command, and it's very helpful.
And the nice thing about a lot of these commands is that their names, it might seem weird at first, but once you get used to them, you'll be like, oh, like the name RM just means like remove, or like man is for manual. So they all have sort of intuitive names that you'll get used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see the chat again. Okay. And now I can't see the chat.
Okay, more Linux command files to change permissions in a file, chmod, compare files for differences, compare files differences, print text to terminal window, echo, search for patterns in lines of text, grep, list running processes, ps, terminate processes, kill, verify network connectivity, ping clear recent commands, clear. So yeah, if you need to learn how to use them, you can look up how to use them. And I don't know, it's kind of, you just kind of need to try out using them in order to really get a sense for how they work. Okay, yeah, specifying paths. So / is like your root directory or separator. Okay, sorry. Tilde is like, can be used in place of home directory, like maybe it'd be a longer name, but yeah, that's the way that you can do it. Dot is current directory, dot is the parent directory. You can like also use absolute relative paths. So like absolute is starting from the root directory, so you'd specify all the way from the root, whereas relative is relative to your current working directory. So like if you're, say, currently in your documents folder, you could like do a relative one if you want to access something else in there, or you could like start off, you could specify from the root directory and it should be able to know. Yeah, and useful shortcuts on the side. Instead of having to type in the same command a bunch of times, you can just go up in order to access your previous commands, and tab can autocomplete if you're typing something.
Yeah, so like if you're typing a file name, you can use tab to complete the file name, assuming there's like one unique file that meets what you've typed so far. And yeah, I always use the up arrow. Okay, so now we're going to talk about briefly input and output redirection. So whenever you're using commands, you might want to either read an input from a file or write the output of the command to a file. And that's where these commands come in. So first we have let's say if you want to use the contents of a file as the input to a program, what you could use is this. Is this a less than sign? Yeah, the less than sign. I don't know what that's called. The less than sign, and then you can put the file name or the file path. Whenever you have a file name or a file path, you could do either, assuming that if the file's in the current directory, you just put the file name, or you could put like an absolute path. But if the file is in a different folder, then you'd have to put some sort of path to it. And that's where you could use either the absolute or the relative paths. This command WC, I don't know if we had it in the previous slides, but it pretty much counts the number of words. It's like a word count program. And this -L flag just tells you to count the number of lines this file outputs. This just counts the number of the lines that this file has. Yes, and then if you want to redirect output to a file, so let's say you're trying to echo hello, but you want to put that in a file. What you could do is use this greater than symbol and then specify the file you want. And this will either create a new file if you don't already have one with that name, or otherwise it will overwrite the existing file if you just have a single greater than sign. But if you want to instead append to the end of an existing file, you can use 2 greater than signs, which means append to this file if this file already exists. Otherwise, just create this file and then put all the contents in it. And yeah, so you can combine input and output redirection. So you could into echo, you could redirect the input from a file instead of specifying it here, and then you can also output it to a file, so that way you're like working with multiple files if you want to do. And we can clarify that when we kind of do like a little bit of a terminal practice after. And then if you want to run multiple programs or multiple commands at once and pass the output of one command to another command, you can use this pipe operator, which is this, I don't know what this is called, but it's the one right below the backspace on your keyboard, and that's like the pipe symbol. So it'll pretty much sorts all the lines in a file. So what you'll do is if you had a list of names and they're all separated by like a new line, would just sort them in alphabetically, and you could use this pipe operator to then pass it to the unique command, which will extract, I believe, the unique. It'll just keep one copy of each line, so all the lines will be unique. And you can pipe as many times as you want in like one command. So you could be piping through multiple commands just to do, if you're trying to do something more complicated. But that's kind of how input and output redirection goes. Do people have questions so far? I don't know if, I can't really see the chat. Half the time it doesn't show up, but. Okay, I'm going to assume, oh wait, Evelyn, did anyone type anything?
No, we're good.
No? Okay, so here we're going to, we were thinking of like doing a little demo so you kind of see that we just kind of threw a lot of commands at you, but it's really not that scary. So we were wondering, I guess we can take your opinions on whether you want us to demo it first and then try it out yourself, or if you want to demo and follow along, just let us know what you want us to do, or I guess if you don't care, you can just not vote. I don't know. Okay, yeah, everyone voted. It looks like you guys want us to demo for you, and then we can, you can try it out individually and follow along. And if it's quick, we can also do breakout rooms for a little bit if you want to like try it out on your own and ask us questions about stuff. But yeah, so I guess we're going to demo for you, and then you can follow along, and we can also have you like go out into rooms if you want. Okay. Yeah, so this is just because I'm like on Windows, so I don't have like a Linux style command terminal. So there's like this online terminal we found, which we're just going to use. And we had like a list of stuff to try. If you want, you guys can start trying it yourselves. And then we can make this interactive by, I guess, no, I can't see the chat still. If you guys want to guess what you're supposed to, I had like 6 things I wanted to try before we do more complicated stuff. So we could have you guys tell me what to do for each step if you want. I don't know if that sounds okay, but yeah, in Mac you can just go to terminal. Okay, yeah, so the first thing I guess I said is to create a folder, my folder, and add my file.
Oh, someone's asking, can we use Putty?
Oh yeah, you can use Putty, but if you use Putty, I think you would have to connect to some, like if you're using the CSNet machines, yeah, you can just connect to the CSNet machines and use the Linux server there. I'm not on the VPN, so I'm just going to use this online thing. But yeah, you can use Putty if you're on Windows and if you can connect to some sort of Linux machine. Okay, so that answered your question, right? Okay, we're just gonna keep going. So like first thing first is like this is what you'll see when you open up some shell, like if you're on a Linux or if you're using SSH into some other device, you'd see like this sort of $ symbol, and what you can do is like, let's say you want to see what's in your current directory first before you do anything, you would just type ls and you'd hit enter, and they have some file that's called welcome to cocalc.term because I don't know why, they just have a file there. Yeah, and then you'll notice that the squiggle here means that we're currently in the home directory, and this is actually like a symbolic link, which we didn't really talk about, but it pretty much it's pretty much saying this is your current path here. So like if I want to make a folder my folder, does anyone want me to, should I just go ahead and do it, or do people want to like, yeah, I'll just go ahead and do it unless people want to suggest things. So to make a folder, I would do mkdir, and then, which is just like make dir, I think, yeah, and then I would call it my folder. And then if I wanted to check that my folder is here, what I could do is I could do ls, and it shows me my folder. And normally folders will be in like a different kind of font or color than your normal files. So like if you're following along on your Macs, or like if you're using Putty and connected to the Linux system, you'll see that it shows up a little bit differently. You could also do, if I want to make an empty file, I could do touch my file. And touch, actually, what it does is it updates the timestamps on files to the current time, but you can use it a lot of times to make an empty file, which is what I did here. And then do ls, you can see that my file is here. If I wanted to output the contents of my file to the Win terminal, I could just do cat my file, I think, and it shows nothing because my file is currently empty. But let's make my file not be empty. I've discarded the script, I'm sorry. So we're gonna just add, if we wanted to put contents into my file, like let's say if we want to put hello into my file, I could go echo hello and then use output redirection to put it into my file. And let's just append it. So I use the 2 greater than signs. That means I'm going to append to my file. And I can just hit tab here. And then now I've put it into my file. And now if I do cat my file, I should be able to see hello displayed, because that's what this command echo put this content into my file. And the quotes are used to just indicate that it's a string, so that way, because if you want to put multiple things like separated by a space, it might get confused that you're giving it a lot of different options. So you would want to like say hello world, and you would put it in quotes just to specify it's like one argument. Yeah, just to specify it's 1 argument. And then I could do that, and I could use the up arrow to go back to my previous commands, just show the output of the file. Okay, so I've done the things I said we should try in this order. We've already done number 1 and 2. We created the folder my folder and the file my file, and we've checked that they exist using the ls command. If we wanted, we could do ls -d just to play around and see that these are just showing the directories, and Actually, let's do ls minus a, which means show everything in my current directory, including these symbolic links. So you'll see that we have a lot of like system files that start with the dot. And you'll also see the dot and the dot dot, which we already talked about. Does anyone remember what they were? For funsies. I don't know if I can see the chat. Okay, the dot just is the path to the current directory, and the way the Linux stores that is by actually making a file in each directory that's just referenced by this dot, and it's also, I believe, a symbolic link, which you don't have to worry about. It just pretty much points to this folder. So if I wanted, it's another way to represent this folder, and this 2 dots is a way to represent the previous folder. So we talked about how this will, like, if you did use this will let you navigate to the previous folder or refer to the previous folder's path. And we'll use these commands after I navigate first into my folder. So to do that, use the cd or the change directory command. I'm going to go into my folder. So I typed my and I hit tab because I like the auto populate. And now you'll see that this path here has been updated to show that I'm now in my folder. So it tells you right now what your current directory is. I could also just do pwd and it tells me, oh, this is where I'm currently at. And actually you can see that this is what it returned is actually the full absolute path rather than it doesn't have any symbolic links. Like this is the root directory here, specified this by this backslash, and then these are the subdirectories. So it gives you like the complete path rather than referring to it using the home symbol. What did I say I would do next? I said we'd copy my file into my folder. So cp is for copy, and if I wanted to refer to my file, I would have to specify a path to it since it's not currently in my directory. We created my file in the home directory, but now I'm in my folder. So to refer to that file, I'd have to use the 2 dots. To say one way to do it at least is to use the 2 dots and then do my file. That means that this is providing a relative path to this file. Rather, you could also provide an absolute path to this file. So I could have done home, I could specify starting from the root directory. I could also specify home user my file, and this also works. So I could do either of those things, and then I want to copy it to this folder. So what I could do is just do a dot to say copy from this place to the current directory. And if I wanted to rename the file when I copied it here, I could actually specify a name for it. So I could be like copy my file to my file copy, and that should work. So if I list the contents of this directory that I'm currently in, you'll see that I copied the file here, but I also renamed it, which is useful, yeah. Especially if you like don't want to keep the same file name everywhere. So now I have my file copy, and if we want to make sure it's the same as my file, we can just output whatever contents it had. So let's just do my file copy, and we'll see it says hello hello world, which is what we put into it. Yeah, so I'm going to clear the screen because there's a ton. So I just type clear. Now we're still in my folder. We're going to navigate up one directory to the previous directory. So I could use change directory again, dot dot. And then here I'm back in the home directory. And then I want to remove the copy of my file in the current directory. So I want to remove my file, which is just rm for remove my file. And then I can just list the contents of this directory to see that, okay, this file's gone now. We could also do a couple more commands if you wanted. Like I mentioned WC in one of the examples. So if I wanted to see how many lines are in my file, I could do WC minus L my file, and we expect this output. Oh wait, I deleted it. Okay, my folder, my file copy, and we expect this to have 2 lines because the first line was hello, the second line was hello world. So if I do that, it tells you 2. Oh, yeah, it says 2. I'm not sure why I outputted the name, but another way to, yeah. You can also use cat to print out the contents of a file. So I could also have done this using my cat, my folder, and then my file copy, and I use tab to autocomplete this. And I can use the pipeline operator to just go ahead and type the output of this. So let's just show you guys what the output of this. The output of cat, my file, my folder copy is this. But now I use the up arrow here to pull it back so I don't have to retype it. And I can pipe that into word count minus L, which means the number of lines, and that'll give me 2. Yeah. Is there any stuff about this that you're confused about? Like any of these like commands that you're like, how do I use that? I kind of want to know now, or anything? Are people just following along on their own, or? Just vibing. Yeah, do people have stuff they're like confused about, like the paths or some of the commands we mentioned? They're like curious about them. I'm gonna assume no. You can feel free to like type stuff in the chat later, but I'm gonna go back to the slideshow, unless Evelyn has some ideas of what I should try, or if you want to demo something, I don't know.
I think you did it. I think you've got the main things, yeah.
Okay, in that case, let's go back here. Yeah, so like I did try everything in this list because I had this list open somewhere else, but I also tried some other stuff, and we're just gonna keep going. So another thing we want to talk about is how to read a man page, because they're like all the documentation. So if you're like, I don't know how to use this command, and you don't find like a really simple article and like that tells you how to do it, like, because like sometimes you can Google commands and they'll tell you exactly how to do it in really simple language, but sometimes you can't find that, so you'll have to turn to the documentation, and which they look scary at first, but they're like not. You'll get used to them after you look them up a couple of times. So the first thing to know is that man pages are divided into sections. So like they'll have the name, synopsis, which is pretty much just how to run the command. They'll have a description. So the synopsis will tell you like the format you should enter the command in to your terminal. They'll have a description of what the command does. They'll have the different options you can use. So those are the flags that start with the hyphen. They'll also have an exit status, the return value, authors, seal. So they have a lot of different possible categories. Some of them are like not required for every man page. And to open a man page for a specific command, you can type into the terminal man name of command. So like if I were to go back here, I could type into man and I could do man ls, and that opens the man page, but we're gonna go back here. Yeah, and then if you need help when you have a man page open, you can type H, just hit H on your keyboard and there'll be like help window with shortcuts. And then at the bottom, there's also a link for like, has more info than we're going to present today. We're going to do like a really brief thing, but there's like a lot more info there, and that website's really helpful for finding out more. Yeah. So this I did on the Linux server. You can see I used putty here, and this is a man page for ls again, and you'll notice that this bold text, so like in the synopsis, this ls is actually bold, and this minus a and this minus, these flags were actually bold, and those should be entered in exactly as they appear, whereas the square bracket here, option, is, these are like parameters, so these are optional arguments for the command, and so you could put in options and you can put in file. So if you wanted to specify list the directory contents of a different directory, you could specify that using a file here, is what this is telling you. Yeah, I kind of jumped into synopsis. The name is here. It says name ls list directory contents. here's the description. So it tells you a little bit about what this command does. And it says list information about the files. The current directory is by default. So again, like you can specify a directory instead if you want to see the contents of a different directory. And it'll be sorted alphabetically if some of these parameters aren't specified. And then, so I did show us using ls-a, which is the short a, which says do not ignore entries starting with a dot. And that's like, it tells you a lot of different options. So like, there's a lot, and you'll only find yourself using a few of them maybe, but you'll see that all the possible options are in the man pages. And the man page is actually separated by different sections. So like this is the user command section, and this one refers to the user command section. There's like other numbers that could be appearing in this parentheses that refer to different sections of the manual, which is just for funsies, I guess. Yeah. So if you go back here, you'll notice at the bottom it says that press H for help or Q to quit. So if you open the man page and you want to leave, you can just type Q. If I decided to type H, it'll take me to a window like something like this. And this pretty much tells you exactly how you can navigate the man page. So you can use up and down to move one line at a time. And you can also use these commands, like the up and down arrow. You can also use these commands to go forward one line. So you can use either E, you can do Control E, you can do J, you can do Control N, or you can do the Enter key. This is carriage return. So you can do any of those keys to go down one line. So there's like a lot of different shortcuts to do the same exact thing. And it says, has some notes here. So like a key preceded by the caret indicates it's the control key. And that's how I knew this was a Control E and this was a Control N. And then another notable one is the D and the U, which is to go forward 1/2 window and a backward 1/2 window. Yeah, and this note here just said what I said about multiple ways to do the same thing. Okay, so on the bottom here again, I think I'll tell you exactly how, if you want to leave, you can press Q to when you want to leave the screen, and you can press return for more info at the bottom. So it tells you how to navigate. And then if you wanted to search, what you can do is just start typing, just type the backslash in your search term and hit enter, and this will highlight everything. So like in the example, I did that with list, and it just highlighted all the instances of list, and you can use N to keep going forward in them, and type Shift N to go backward one entry. So like just jump you to the next example of that search term. So then here is from the man page. So you'll see this is a screenshot. This top one is a screenshot from the man page, and it says that the -L means to use a long listing format. So what that means is if you type it into the terminal, it'll produce results like the following. So in the past, when I did ls, you just saw the names of different files and folders. But if you use the -L, you'll see the type of file. So D means directory. These hyphens are just normal files, but D means directory. These are all the permissions, and we'll talk about them a little bit more. These are the number of links. So you don't have to worry about that. This has to do with how the files are actually stored in Linux, which is like a whole nother tangent that we didn't want to get into, but you can just ignore what that is. This is like the owner. So this is the owner of the file. So root is like a root. There's a root user, which has like all the permissions. So that's just saying the owner of this file is root. And the group is like another thing that Linux uses to make file permissions a lot easier. So you can specify groups for files. That way you can just give everyone in the group permission to do the same thing with the file. So like you can give everyone in a group permission to read a file. And as long as the users you want are in that group, it makes it a lot easier for like permissions. So that's kind of what that is. You can also ignore that. Here's size, here's the modified date, and here's the name. So this is just like an example of like seeing like, oh, we saw a -L option. Let's try it out. And then this is what kind of the output you get. If you're curious about like the permissions, so the first 3 permissions, R means read, W means write, X means execute. So the first 3 permissions are for the owner of the file. The next 3 permissions are for anyone in the same group as the file. The last 3 permissions are for every single other person. So like all other users who aren't the owner or in the group will get these permissions. So yeah, so like that means like if you're curious about like, oh, mail, only the owner can read, write, execute this folder. No one else can touch it. Versus whatever, see another example, like firewall. So the owner can read and write to whatever that file is, but other people in the same group and every other user can only read that file. That's what these permissions mean. The hyphen means they don't have that permission, but if you see the symbol character, that means they have that permission. Okay, yeah, so this is just a slide on like if you write your own program and you're trying to run it in your terminal, but you probably had an infinite loop in there or something, you're like, what do I do? So what you can do is use the keyboard shortcuts. So Control C will set a SIGINT or interrupt signal, which is SIGINT, to the program running, the program can intercept the signal and just choose to ignore it, or it'll clean itself up before exiting. If you type Control Z, this will stop the process and with the sig stop, and you can run the process again after using this FG foreground, I think it's foreground FG command, and specify the process number. After using Control Z, you don't have to worry about this for now because you'll probably just use this when you're stopping your runaway programs and you don't want to rerun them, but you can look this up for more information on if you want to rerun the processes you stop. And if you do these commands in the terminal directly, so like in your terminal window, you don't have any commands open, you just do Control C, you might end up killing your terminal because you'll kill the shell process and you'll have to open a new terminal, or if you're like SSHing into something like I did with, like you do with the Linux servers, you might have to reopen the Linux servers or reconnect to that. Yeah. So here is how to modify permissions with chmod. We thought this would be useful because you'll probably end up, if you're working on the Raspberry Pi project, you'll probably end up needing this. And even if you're not, if you're just downloading files on the Linux server and you want to execute them, like your professors give you some sort of script to run, then you might not have permission to run it until you use chmod. So the one way to run this command is, the way I run it is I use chmod, I specify the users, and then you can specify a plus, a minus, or equals. Then you specify the permissions, and then you specify the file name you're trying to change the permissions for. So for the which users, here again you have the U for the file owner, G for the people who are in the group, O for all other users, and there's actually, you can also specify A, which will just change permissions for everyone at the same time. So you can specify more than one group here, so you could do UG, you could do UGO, you can just specify like whoever, you can just change permissions for user or yourself by doing U. And that's like, you can have up to these three groups, people listed here. So then plus is to add permissions. Plus means add whatever permissions you list here. Minus means remove these permissions from that user. Equal just means set the permissions for that user equal to these permissions. And again, the permissions are read, write, execute. So like on the bottom, I had an example. If you want to give your group members of the file permission to read my file, but not write or execute it, and you want to just give everyone else no permission, what you would do is do chmod. You do G to say G, the group, people in the group. You'd use equal sign to say set it equal to just only write, to only read the file. And then you'd put a comma to say for the user group O, you want to give them no permission. So just do an equal sign and it's empty after that. And then you'd specify the file name of my file. And I think in the comments, I have a link if you want to like read more about permissions and stuff. But yeah, we have a couple commands that are just, you might not know the first one. just to see like what do they do, and we even have a poll for this. So like try it. If you don't know what it does, try running it in a terminal on your own, like such as the one we had linked a few slides ago, or try checking out the man pages and see if you can figure out what these things do. It's fine if you're not sure, but you can try running these commands and see what happens before you vote or try, I guess. Since this is our last like few slides, feel free to take like a few minutes to just try them out if you want, and we can go over it in like 3 to 5 minutes and answer questions after that. I realize now that there's a typo in one of my answers. So I think there's no right answer to number 2 right now. For the last question on the poll, say instead of with that should be without confirmation. I done goofed when I made this poll. That should be without confirmation. Is anyone still trying to figure out how to answer the poll, or if you need more time, just send something in the chat because I can see the chat again.
Or you can privately message one of us in the chat.
Yeah, and we'll wait. Otherwise, we'll maybe go over it. Yeah, so just send either a private message or like just message us if you want us to not go over it now. Otherwise, we're gonna go over it.
Can probably go ahead and go over it.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna just go over it. So I'm gonna end polling. You can see the results if you're curious. These results aren't very correct, but that's on us, I guess. Also, I then goofed number 2, but for the first one, this was kind of a trick question because we didn't go over what exactly that does. So actually, if you're trying to move so foo.txt and bar.txt, the .txt makes you think that this is, makes it clear that these are probably not directories, these are both files. And if I did that, what actually happened was that I'd be renaming foo.txt to bar.txt, which is, this is how you want to rename files if you're on the command line. You would use the what's technically called the move command, mv, and it'll actually rename files for you. And you can do that to rename folders too. So like this was kind of a trick question, but yeah, so like don't feel bad if you didn't know it because we didn't actually go over it till here. That was the first one. The second one was people can see the results, right? Like a lot of people voted for the last one, which was correct once you add the without confirmation. So remove, this is the remove command. The -r means recursive, so it means whenever you see -r in like move or like remove, that means recursive. So that means the folder and all its contents. And the F flag means force, so that will never prompt you, and they'll delete everything in your folder so that you give it without asking you for confirmation. So like really be careful if you do that. I think I did that to one of my projects once a few days before it's due, so that was kind of sad. Don't be careful when you use remove on folders. Yeah, it won't prompt you, it'll just delete it. And then finally, chmod u plus x myscript. So here, chmod, it stands for change mode, which is kind of weird. It's what you use to change permissions. And most of you got it. It gives users permission to execute the file. So the U means user or the file owner, right? And the plus means you're adding permissions. And the X means execute, permission to execute. So you're giving them permission to the user group, which is the owner of the file, permission to execute the file. And then the file is called myscript. So like you might see yourself using this when you like download like a script for one of your classes. They tell you to run the script on your submission. So you download it and you'd be like, okay, but I can't execute it. So it gives you an error. So you'd be like, okay, I probably have to give myself permission to execute it. So that's what you would use chmod for. Does that make sense of all these poll questions? Do people have questions about any of these 3 examples?
I think we're good.
Okay. So there's like a lot of other topics about Linux. So I mentioned symbolic links once or twice and never really talked about them. Those have to do with the structure of files. So like inodes, which is all stuff that we did not go into. There's a lot of other comprehensive history commands and shortcuts. There's stuff called path variables, and some commands we skipped. I actually used cat in my demo, but I skipped stuff like head, tail. There's like a lot of different commands. So like if you're curious and if you want to learn more, you can always search things up, or yeah, you can always search things up. But just to use the command line interface, you don't need to know about too much of this. It's just yeah, it's just there. I think I made this when we made this when we were making like slides for the Raspberry Pi. So yeah, there's just memes here. I don't know why. Does anyone have any questions? I'm gonna actually stop recording while I'm at it.